How about a hand for D-Raj and Swan? Great information. AI is the new UI. Did you write that down? Who's already printed the T-shirt up? I'm going to buy one on the street before I leave here today. I guarantee it will be out there. And also, how about the concept of the AI? I like the concept of the AI agents as a partner or a co-pilot that D-Raj shared. It's not doing the work. We're not it's working together with the humans, and that's how we're going to optimize this whole technology and this whole new platform. So, just a couple of housekeeping events. We will have breaks after our next presentation. We're going to have breaks throughout the day. And are you enjoying the coffee and the breakfast? Was that good? Give the folks all from catering crew a hand back there. And Jameer and his whole team that's providing sound for us. Let's give them all a hand for running this beautiful place today. And by the way, anybody have an open chair next to them? I know there's some folks in the back that would love to sit. Please raise your hand if you have an open chair. Just want to invite some of the people in the back. Come on up. We can officially say we are standing room only. But if there is room in the chair, there's a couple of chairs over here. Please grab a seat, make yourselves comfortable, because we got a jam-packed and a wonderful afternoon. Highlighted, again, we're going to close out this afternoon on the beautiful roof. I was told we actually ordered the sun to come out, and it's going to be out, and the Knicks will win tonight too, just so you know. So, with that, our next presentation, I am delighted to introduce the head of product here at DevRev. He goes by M&N, because that's his initials, and you are about to lose yourself in his presentation. Put your hands together for the head of product, Michael Machado.
I think we're going to bring some chairs up, yeah?
Yep.
Well, this is a bit of a dream come true. I get to do a fireside chat now with two amazing people, Scott Belsky, Georg Petschnigg, SVP of New York Times Design, and also we get to be welcomed by the Chief Strategy Officer from Adobe, who's had a storied career there. So I'd love to invite both of them up to the stage now, and then we'll kick things up. See everyone as well?
Yep.
Oh, great, okay.
Mike has a mic.
Oh, wonderful. Get comfortable. All right, I like to,
There's a video playing.
there's a video playing back there, but I'm blocking the screen, sorry. So I'll start off easy as we get the video, highlight both of your amazing backgrounds. We've seen product development as a whole kind of transform with AI. You all have touched not only design, but also engineering, you've touched product management. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you're seeing it, how you're promoting it within your organizations, how you're controlling it within your organizations, and maybe what you're hoping to achieve in the next 6 months that you can't do today.
In terms of the deployment of AI?
Deployment of AI, leveraging AI within your teams, more from an internal adoption perspective.
Can you just hold the mics a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
They can't.
Well, I'll start, and I'm sure you have some insights from New York Times as well. For us, you have to think about it this way. Like every function of an organization has always been very constrained to its vertical, and there's always been a learning curve in order for every function to perform its duties. And so in some ways, whether it was product management or QA or design, I mean, there are different stacks of tools that all have a learning curve, and then you have program managers working in between folks to translate between their workflows and the tools that they're using and everything else. Fast forward to today, one thing that is really striking to me is how AI is enabling any stakeholder to basically use any tool without even having endured the learning curve of how to use it. You can come in and query Jira tickets to figure something out. You can go into Photoshop not even understanding how to use the product, and you can say, well, I want to remove this, and just circle it, and then it just removes it. And what I happen to know from products like Photoshop that we have at Adobe is that a lot of people used to fail out of those products because they weren't the core design team. They were the folks adjacent. They were the stakeholders, and they didn't know how to use them. And now suddenly they're being successful more quickly. And if you think about the definition of product-led growth, it's basically customers feeling successful more quickly. That's happening across every product right now. And so as I see our teams developing products within the organization, the idea of every stakeholder being able to sort of leverage some aspect of every product, and also AI starting to break down the boundaries between functions that you used to have to rely on people to translate between. I mean, it's pretty transformative, and I think that's just the beginning. But those are just a few thoughts of my early observations.
And so a lot of this, the observation Scott's making about the actual product development applies to the New York Times as well. I'll probably highlight another area where we're seeing just the impacts of AI playing out for the New York Times. Obviously, the New York Times, I like to think of it as one of the oldest information technology organizations. That's what the New York Times at the core really does. It ingests information, tries to make sense of it, and presents it as easily digestible with clarity so people can use the information to understand more about the world. So AI in this case is an opportunity, and it's also a challenge. We need to be able to provide highly accurate, trustworthy information. And so I would say at this moment in time, still one of the downsides of a lot of language models, they happily will fabricate information, right, which is something that the New York Times really can't stand with. But at the other side, there is also then sort of the opportunity of really being able to relay and compare and bring together lots of different types of information that used to not be able to match up. So today, like our newsroom will be able to hear a fact about the use of certain types of missiles and weapons in a war, and we'll be able to immediately spin up a machine learning model to analyze satellite photography and actually validate some of those facts, bring together two sets of data and different types of facts that used to not be able to be brought together. So it's really transformative in the sense of what type of information can be presented to a reader, and also, as Scott was saying, the same sort of unlock around sort of being able to utilize different types of information is accelerating the product development process as well.
So I'll start easy, and then we're going to work our way to some really hard questions at the end. I promise to. I'm like a game show host. I want to make sure if you're hitting the $1 million mark, it's got to be worth it. So the culture of design. Well, that's the touchy-feely stuff. Maybe we'll start with the product design side and work our way to the marketing design side. How do you, George, think about the role of sort of designers now in the era of AI and how they're implementing new product development? So how are you thinking about just the role of designers changing?
Yeah, there is, with any technology, there's a really important arc to it. At the early phases, it's just about canvassing work. There is a tremendous amount of invention and engineering work that needs to get into it. But very quickly, once things work, you get to questions of well, what should it do? And how does it best fit into people's lives? And that's sort of, when it comes to, we've clearly crossed the chasm to AI and now algorithms just doing and working really, really well. But we're still in this area where people assign to it superhuman capabilities, or you use words like learning or hallucination, right? No, that's what humans do. We need to understand that at the core, and that's sort of where the designer needs to actually behave much more like a scientist than like an engineer. He needs to deeply understand the technology, what is possible, and apply the level of empathy to the end user. What is the thing that we now can enable for someone, right? What is the thing where we can introduce more convenience or more speed or enable a new capability, a human capability? But you need to really do that through observing what the human is doing. I'm sharing this because I worked for Microsoft for many years, where I saw the transformation from Microsoft Bob to Clippy, which I think is that story repeats, where at the early phases of each technology generation, people assume these humanizing technology. Humans, even when you look at an outlet, you think it's a face, right? We assume a human-to-human interaction, even with technology, right? But you need to look back past that and really just keep focusing on what is it we can enable and make, what's going to be different for the user, be it the reader, the journalist, or designer. And so, actually I should say, looking at some of the technologies and tools that Adobe has been building and developing, there's just sort of this really incredible, Scott, I've been really admiring how Adobe has been focusing on the steerability of AI in a lot of its applications, being able to, for example, combine structure, the human hand, and the guidance, and then using AI models to fill in the details in a lot of the designs. So that's like a sort of a really, really good insight, a human insight of saying, it's like, well, how do you really get a designer to convey sort of the bigger picture and utilize some of the AI technology to fill in some of the areas that are tedious and time consuming, but that symbiosis and a lot of the dimensions that are coming out of Adobe are quite promising.
Couldn't agree more. I think I love the Clippy analogy. I think we've seen a lot of Clippies pop up over the past 6 months, and hopefully we start to, maybe Clippy was just early for its time. Let's look at it in a positive light. Well, Scott, I think you've got an interesting purview about how probably marketing is transforming right now with AI. Some huge advantages coming from it. But also there's this context that things are going to start to look a lot of the same, right? If AI is generating content for everybody, the tone, the imagery, the way your brand stands out becomes really important, right? And I'd love to maybe think, from your perspective, how to leverage AI in a really strategic way from a marketing design perspective, but also maybe areas to stay away from.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, I love the term steerability. I think that is, I'm going to use that. We use chisel, but I think the point is that creatives want creative control always, right? And I think that the opportunity to give them that with the power of AI is really the holy grail to some extent. And when you were, when you were talking about the way the products were designed, I was thinking about the use of APIs for designers that allowed them to achieve much more in the interface when all these APIs were available to them. But it was a limited menu of APIs that could enable certain features to surface within a product experience. In some ways, like AI is the new API, because now suddenly anything's possible. I mean, you can really just build sort of an AI layer to enable something on the interface. So I actually think that it's all about interfaces, going forward. And I just think that there's so much innovation to be done by folks in this room and all of us around that space. When it comes to marketing design, well, gosh, every brand's going to start flooding the zone. I mean, you can make infinite anything. Variations, you can make 60, 80,000 variations of an ad and then just run them. You can obviously create infinite blog posts to drive SEO. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling. I think that two things are going to happen in this era. Number one is the age of personalization. In fact, we believe this so much, we literally changed the mission of Adobe to change the world not through digital experiences, but through personalized digital experiences. And as an executive team, we debated that, and we realized the future is all about personalized commerce. Every website we go to today treats us as a stranger, right? It should literally welcome us by name someday. And every marketing piece of email we get or text should know everything we've ever purchased and everything we like and dislike. I mean, it's kind of crazy that we navigate the world today still sort of anonymous, when in fact it's a basic human desire to be known and feel special. We just want to know how we're known. We don't want it to feel like it's creepy and being sniffed and sold behind our back. We want it to be on our own terms. So when you think about the future of marketing, it's going to be hyper-personalized. I think the other thing that's going to happen is that because we are inundated with all of this content, every brand flooding the zone, and also so much of it being personalized, we're going to have a higher bar as humans for the content that moves us. And guess what? This is where the human comes in, right? Emotion and story and craft and narrative are the things that make us look twice, right? When everything is generic, but one thing speaks to us. And how do you build and create that content? We happen to think that it's not the random number that is applied to the outcomes of a machine learning model that creates meaning, but it's the not random number that humans apply to something that they're creating in their mind's eye that then they put out into the world. If you think about it, creativity is the world's greatest recycling program. I mean, everything that we get inputs around throughout our life's experiences and traumas generate the outputs that we put out into the world. These models also have inputs of everything that's ever been created, and then they generate outputs. The one thing that they don't have that we have is that ability to really, do something based on the meaning that we see in something. And I think that that's going to have a resurgence across marketing as well as content generation and entertainment.
Do you feel like, and maybe a short answer, that the way brands are starting to talk about themselves, whether it's in blogs and written content, which we've seen LLMs perform obviously best at right now, but also image generation, that it's distilling down brands, or are you seeing brands actually stand out from leveraging AI?
From leveraging AI in the marketing?
Yeah, in the marketing material.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about the best brands that we see using this technology are using it to create variations of content. They're using it to streamline translation of content. They're empowering a small group of people to do that kind of meaning-driven content generation I was talking about. But then all the stuff that happens after that was extraordinarily time-consuming and expensive and not scientific, is totally being revolutionized by AI.
All right, I'm going to flip it to you, George. You mentioned interfaces, which was the next topic I want to talk about. New York Times has adapted its interface probably multiple times, but at least within your time spent there, really leading the path on digital, on analytics, and the ability to visualize data. Now you're looking at this new paradigm where people are going to ChatGPT, asking questions about the news. Maybe that's not the most recent, but asking questions about information, right? And you talked about New York Times being an information company. How do you adapt again and again and again, and think about adapting now to this new UI that's maybe LLM driven? I don't want to say chatbot driven, but it's a chat interface. It's a conversational interface now, where you're not just speaking to the customer and giving them the news, but they're interacting with the news in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would love to give a history lesson on all the ways how the New York Times has adapted itself from like the hot type era to like the digital type to like ticker tapes on buildings to apps to where we are now. But there is I'm just going to say that you don't stay in business for 107 years if you're not constantly innovating, right? That's sort of a ground truth. Like the world is complex, ever evolving. And it's such in looking at that, it was a change when I joined sort of New York Times, coming from some of the world of tech. I was like, and I started really seeing a tremendous innovative spirit. And it comes from this belief in many ways in the newsroom that says like, you know what, the newsroom's job is trying to figure out, what is the format a story deserves, right? So this is a really interesting thing about the New York Times as a common interest publication. It doesn't say we need to write an article, or we need to create a video, or we need to create a blog post. They will say, let's look at the facts, let's look at the unfolding story, and then figure out what the format needs to be, right? Take, for example, the unfolding of COVID, where we're living through this crazy time period, thousands, billions of data points coming in. We're trying to make sense of like, should you wear a mask? Or what type of mask? Like, do you need to clean your Amazon delivery? I mean, it's a crazy world of information that's coming in. But the team was there trying to map out like, okay, well, how do we show some of these, how do we show the data analysis that's coming in? How do we really show sort of the COVID tracker? How do you provide like on the ground live reports there? And it ended up creating this, what I would describe as a really multimedia and comprehensive coverage of an unfolding event like COVID. Going back to now the chatbots, right? That's sort of one interface approach, right? On which to provide access into information. And yes, you can improve sort of search results and different relevancy. I'll give two actually really interesting examples of that. One is within our advertising space, where we'll be able to do much better audience segmentation and addressing, mapping of sort of advertising to the content and that the New York Times has. Like, that's sort of a very unexpected sort of use of some of the, I would say, more looser matching that you're able to do. And the second thing is like at the very core where the New York Times is starting is, Giraffe, you mentioned the problem of labeling. Labeling is a big challenge in categorization for a newsroom, right? Because you're maintaining labels over decades. Right, and so that's another one of those applications where we're utilizing a lot of these tools and translation models, trying to see, like, are there certain tasks that we can, like, automate to provide more accuracy and reliability? And ultimately, then we'll figure out what's sort of the right interface to engage with that. But it's going to be multimedia for sure, because, like, the world is multimedia.
Scott, same question, kind of going towards you. You've ushered Adobe through the idea of going to the cloud, the idea of converging your application experiences, most recently with AI, leading the charge. What are some of the lessons in these transformations that you're going to just continue to apply, or that other people in the audience here can apply to their organizations?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, and Raj knows this, being on our board. It's, going to the cloud, it's one thing to transition a business model and to say, hey, we're a cloud company now. It's another thing to start to deliver value through cloud services. And that requires, as a lot of folks know in this room, you have to then go down to the platform level and say, okay, wow, we've got lots of work to do. Do we even have the right people to do this work? And then you have to make some fundamental decisions that are bets on the future, and then it goes from there. Let's see. If I think through lessons learned in transitions, first of all, small groups make more effective decisions than large groups. And I think that in big companies, the tendency is to have consensus and get everyone involved, especially in a fundamental decision. But ironically, maybe you're better off making a fundamental decision with a much smaller group right at the onset, because otherwise, there will just always be a drive towards the lowest common denominator that makes the most people in the room happy. And you have to make very difficult decisions. Sometimes, by the way, even a bad decision made fast is better than a good decision made slow, because at least a bad decision you learn very quickly, and then you course correct, and that is gold, right? When you actually learn, when you start to, in the dark room where you know nothing, when you suddenly start to illuminate part of the room, even if it's the part of the room you don't want to go, you now know that, and I always push my team to make us make decisions. I think that one of the best practices for all of us in our organizations is to push for decisiveness. Here we are in a different Cambrian explosion of sorts, right? Adobe's gone through the era of going to the internet, going to the web, going to the cloud, and now going into AI. And once again, there are lots of ideas in the organization. Everyone wants to be a part of every conversation and decision. And again, we just have to make sure we're making decisions very quickly, which I wish I could say is super easy, but it's not.
I'm going to shift gears to more of your taste, because I think both of you come with incredible taste, having built companies, built brands. Personifying AI right now, right? To the point I've seen some virtual avatars trying to deliver me the news on some sites that have been kind of creepy. But also we're seeing AI agents start to actually play the role of sales, of customer research, right? And getting in there and actually, not only through your website, but actually talking to customers and helping you distill information. How do you think about mimicry in AI? And I'd love to hear both of your opinions on this, both personifying an individual, personifying a role, but also mimicking individuals. And what are maybe the pros, the cons, the gotchas that we should be afraid of right now?
How do you feel from your Clippy days?
Well, there's so much to be learned from that.
Don't mimic a paper clip is the one last.
Well, I mean, look, there's deeper research behind Clippy, and it's actually really important to study that. I mean, it's the work of Clifford Nass that informed the design of, Microsoft Bob and then Clippy, and there's a work on the media equation. And it's humans crave and need familiarizing metaphors. That's how we understand the new. You understand something by relating it to something that you know, right? And human experiences and shared human experiences is just one way how to really get into this. We think through analogies, but again, we need to be really, really careful in that process to not get ahead of ourselves. Clifford Nass will describe in the media equation sort of how you do create sort of this uncanny valley, and you describe sort of Jessica Rabbit as this cartoon-like character that speaks with a human voice, and it creates an incredible dissonance, and it feels just disingenuine. from the New York Times perspective, the way we look at that, and that's sort of a design philosophy, like we do actually eschew a lot of ornamentation. It is actually quite a pared back aesthetic experience where you try to be and stay as close as possible to the facts. In my designs of products and tools in the past, I have used like skeuomorphic interfaces. I've developed an application called Paper, but we never pretended it to be paper. We intended it to evoke the feeling of flexibility of paper. Or, for example, there was a color tool in there, right, that looked like watercolor, but we never called it watercolor because it was much more about getting to sort of the feeling and sensation of working with color, right? So I believe like, agents or sort of human interfaces oftentimes can be sort of a crutch. But think about like the state of the art in TV and film, how hard it is to actually create a convincing human, and they still haven't done it. So I would be really, really careful saying that, our design solution here is to create like a personified experience, because you're going to be far from it, and more importantly, you're going to actually really miss sort of the true nature of the material, the true nature of what it can be. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think I have a similar take. One of the fascinating things I've learned over the years in product is that you nail an onboarding for your product, and that onboarding, you iterate it, and then suddenly you get to a point where you're content with how people are getting through it and not attriting and feeling successful in the product. And then your team is like, oh, great, we figured it out now. Let's go on to the next problem. And then you realize a few years later that your onboarding isn't working anymore. And you're like, well, how is that possible? We nailed it. How could it suddenly be degrading? And what you realize is that every cohort of new customers is different. And as you get to the pragmatist customers, the people who don't want to be using your product, the people who are being told they have to, not the willing and forgiving early adopters, but the people who are like, okay, fine. You realize that the onboarding actually doesn't work as well for that new cohort of new customers, and you have to continue to iterate the onboarding. And I think that some of the greatest products in the world always put effort on the first mile experience, despite feeling like it's a waste of time because they should be building the product for power customers and monetizing. I think similarly, when it comes to adopting new technology through interfaces, you mentioned skeuomorphic design. We all look at the early iPhone UI now and think that's so ridiculous. Like they had stitching in the notebook, but it was kind of like iPhone's way of getting us to be comfortable with this concept. It was a little patronizing for us as humans, but it was kind of necessary to some degree for widespread adoption. But as cohorts of customers came in future generations, right, that kind of grew up in the digital world, they would never have been satisfied, right, with that sort of experience. And so I similarly, by the way, the last point here is business models. What's really interesting to me on the AI front is when companies stop selling seats and they really start selling work to be done, or literally they're competing for headcount, right? And in that instance, maybe you do want to personify the AI value that you're delivering, because that's how the customer is thinking about the decision. How many agents, how many Bobs do I want to go out and generate sales leads for me? I want to buy 5, I want to buy 7. So I think there is that aspect as well that will be factored in.
It's a perfect transition, because I think the rising costs of AI, whether it's model training or model inference, is making, I think, people think about how they're designing their product, their business model, the decisions they make within it. And I'd love to think maybe just about how you all bring that into your design thinking of not only specialized models running on the edge, but also just the ability for your customer experience it, like you said, and say, you know what, when you're interacting with this model, it's like a human in a seat and a license that you would have expected Bob to have, but instead it's a model.
So is the question more around like the culture, like how do you get people comfortable with it, or what?
How do you start to actually think about thinking about model inference and model training costs in actually the design of your products right now?
Got it. Yeah, sort of the efficiency. Yeah. Well, I can kick this off. I think we're constantly doing as much innovation in parallel on efficiency and cost, because it also means speed, right? And I think that whenever we're building we just came out with Image 3, our new Firefly model, and that has as much innovation around the quality of output as it does around the speed and the efficiency of the generation. And I think that all of us need to be parallel processing those paths of innovation to build performant and cost-effective solutions. I think that there are all sorts of questions that everyone's asking right now, and I'm not sure if this is also what you're getting at, but what kind of, first of all, like, do I want to ping a very expensive model in the cloud when I can ping a local, less expensive model to achieve the great outcomes? I mean, my contrarian view in this whole space right now is that we're going to get to a point where the power of these models in the cloud is unnecessary for the majority of functions that we need to provide for our customers that are going to be available locally. And so, all these massive compute races to build these massive models, at some point there might be like a flattening of the curve at the top in terms of what people even need. If 95% of our use cases fall under that curve and we can get it through local or inexpensive, not top of the models, what's that going to, so the industry is probably going to evolve to some degree on that. And then in terms of how things are trained, we're one of the most amazing things. I went into our top customers a year and a half, 2 years ago, and demoed some of the stuff that we were doing in Gen AI. And a lot of these brands and marketing agencies were like, "That's really cool, Adobe, but we would never use that." And it was like, whoa, how could you not use this? And they were like, well, we would never feel comfortable using a model unless we knew it was trained on 100% licensed content, that we could attest 100% to everything that went into it. And so it's a no-go. And that actually dictated our strategy. It was as much about what we felt was right for the artists, but it was also about what we felt the customers actually wanted. And I think that's going to be another factor as models become commonplace in all of our products.
Thank you for acknowledging that, Scott. I appreciate that a lot. That's coming from a.
You guys feel strongly about this?
Well, look, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, as anyone who has ever built something or engineered something, having actually ground truth to reference is immensely valuable. Like, the person that actually come up with the right angle, that took a lot of work to design the very first right angle, and then afterwards, like creating other right angles becomes much easier. And when you take a concept like intelligence, like how do we define intelligence? Where does it come from? Well, we point to other things we think are intelligent or other images that are beautiful, right? So I think there's something there. I have to put on sort of my technologist hat, since when it comes to sort of this particular question, I think when it comes to sort of the processing compute costs of AI, it is immensely fascinating, right? Because we're sort of in the mainframe era, if that makes sense. On the one side, our largest models are being built by trained by some of the most complicated technological machinery. But the moment you identify high value use case and applications, there's always a lower cost specific purpose application that will beat it, right? You saw that transformation from mainframes to CISC computer chips to reduced instruction sets to you're seeing that same connection between sort of compute costs and hardware and software algorithms trending towards faster and cheaper, specific purpose-built applications is something that we're going to see play out. I'm glad I'm not in that business because these are going to be really, really massive shifts. We're more on the probably the benefiting side here as an information processing organization that's going to delete that. But I think if history is any guide, I would say like technology tends to move towards the edge in terms of towards the end user's control and power. I mean, we saw that definitely with the migration of the phone. And all the technology generations that led towards that. And I think with AI, I think it's really, really important to understand what happens at the edge for this. Because some of the most valuable, once you find the most valuable use cases, those will migrate there for real time, for speed.
Yeah, the edge is compute's getting stronger and stronger. Models are getting smaller and smaller. It's all starting to fit in. And I think you brought up a really important point, which is data, right? And I think, I don't know if you want to share your company policy or your personal sort of ethos around it, but the idea of data, your customers' data, public data, the loosely termed public data in the sense that we've all produced a lot of public data without really knowing it over the time. It's obviously there's a benefit we all gain from it. We've contributed to this sort of pool of data, and now we're getting to actually use and leverage models from it. But there's some companies getting very large off that data as well. So maybe some final thoughts that you can share with the group as you're building products, leveraging data that you think, might give you long-term moats, short-term moats. Running on the edge, as you were talking about, as being a really interesting one. But I think we're almost at time, so bringing it all together, I'd love to hear some final thoughts on that.
I mean, from my mind, information is at its most powerful when someone can use it to make a decision. And again, for a reporting organization, for you to present information in such a way that it helps someone make a decision, be more informed, take an action. We need to know their context. We need to know a bit more of their world, right? It isn't good enough to just put 1,500 words out onto a site and have people read it. You need to be able to relate to a personal experience. So I very much, by the way, like what you were saying, Scott, about sort of becoming more personalized. So I think that's really where sort of the nexus needs to be. And then there is a question around transparency. How are you relating sort of a ground set of information and truth to a personal's experience? And you want to be really transparent about that, right? And so I feel like that's sort of, we're not in the business of putting people's data out into the world, but we do want to serve customers as closely as possible. And so for that, like just being really transparent in what's happening, how sort of a gold standard of information is presented for a particular person is something we want to do, and we'll be doing. We want to be really transparent about that.
Really well said.
Well, if you think about, if the models themselves are going to become somewhat commoditized, which I do think will actually end up happening, I do think that the distinguishing elements that in the industry will be the data and the interfaces, and the models are kind of in the middle. It's funny, a lot of companies talk about wanting to buy third-party data on their customers, whatever else. I happen to know that most companies can't even make sense of their first-party data, right? So it's like just make sense with what you actually know about your customer, and build products that personalize your experience based on what you actually know. Like you're going to be in the top 1% if you can just do that. And then I think that there's a question of like making sure that I do think that the data that these models train on will matter increasingly. And I don't know what each country's legislation will be and what each company's policies will be, but I know that most companies are going to have to take into account that lowest common denominator in order to build products that people buy.
Love it. Well, I ate up some of people's break time, and I apologize for that, but I could talk to you guys for hours, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
How about a big hand?